the epidemiology is usually aimed to complete within this year, and then the next year it should be diseases. But since very few people attend in the second year, there's a problem in covering the next year. Then everyone is coming like with multiple queries. Okay, so at least listen to the class to learn something, because otherwise you won't understand, especially the next year when you will be giving exams. So, have you heard the term epidemiology before? Epidemiology naam শুনেছো? Haven't heard. Okay. So, epidemiology, what is epidemiology? And this is a basis of community medicine, basis of public health. So, to understand this, it is not an easy feat to understand it. So, we will understand it through some case studies or stories, by the way which you learn most of the cases in medicine. So, what you can see in this image? You can see someone is being wrapped up and taken somewhere, right? So, this image is showing a person wrapped in a white cloth taken to the hospital. It is during the cholera outbreaks in the 1800s in UK, London, especially around London. So, why are they wrapped around like that? Any idea? Do you see nowadays cholera people taken like this in hospital? কারোর বাড়িতে ডায়রিয়া হয়েছে? Yes or no? কারোর কোনদিনও ডায়রিয়া হয়নি? আচ্ছা. So are any people nowadays taken like this to the hospital? হ্যাঁ না কিছু বল, চোখ চোখ বুঝে সারাদিন পড়াশোনা করে গেছি নাকি 20 বছর ধরে? বাইরে তাকাসনি কোনদিনও কেউ? Until you keep your eyes and ears open, no, you won't learn anything in medicine. This is like skill and hard work, this whole course. Just studying, only studying won't matter in the real life after you pass MBBS. You have to keep your eyes and ears open. Okay? How do patients come to the OPD nowadays? Do they come like this? They don't come like this nowadays, right? So why is this person then wrapped in cloth and taken to the hospital? Because why bolo? Spreading, very good. So spreading jate na hoy, so that there is limited spreading of what? Of they are thinking that something is contaminating them, something is being contaminated from them. So at that time in 1800s, people didn't know that exactly through what the disease is spreading from one person to another. They just know that something is spreading from one person to another, and we should cover that person up and take them elsewhere in the hospital for treatment. So no one was really sure why and how that person got the disease. Okay. How is cholera spread nowadays? এখন তোমরা তো জানো এখন মেডিকেল সায়েন্স অ্যাডভান্সড হয়ে গেছে. সো হোয়াট স্প্রেড কি করে কলেরা? কন্টামিনেটেড ফুড অ্যান্ড ওয়াটার, ভেরি গুড. সো কন্টামিনেটেড ফুড অ্যান্ড ওয়াটার, অ্যান্ড পার্সন টু পার্সন কি করে করবে? So the fluids that are contaminated from the person, that is contaminated with the bacteria Vibrio cholerae, right? So from there, if person touches, the take care kore, the caretaker especially used to get cholera from the infected person. But the people didn't know that it was those contaminated vomiting and the diarrheal matter on the sheets that is spreading the disease. They thought that okay, coming in contact with the person only spread it. Maybe they thought that it was like any skin disease. Okay, like a skin disease or being around them will make them infected only. So it was like that, and there were several cholera outbreaks in London. So what happened is the first cases were noted in August 31st and September 3rd, and by September 3rd 127 people had died. So this cholera outbreak of 1854, what happened is within the span of 4 days more than 100 people had died from cholera just 2-3 days after being infected. Okay, so by September 10 that number has risen to more than 500 and spreading and killing like wildfire. So this cholera is like again like an epidemic has spread. Before that also there were many outbreaks. This outbreak especially was famous. We will come to that why. So this picture that you are seeing is of a area of London, of South London called Soho. So what is happening, you can see there is written Broad Street. So there is a street, there was named Broad Street, and the number of what you can see here, you can see these blocks, right? There are certain blocks like that. So these are the number of cases that has happened in that particular household. It is marked like that. How many number of cholera cases happened in this household and this household, it's like that. So if you are seeing the broader map, this cholera outbreak had happened concentrated around this Broad Street. Okay, so it is mapped like that. Now who has done that mapping? A physician named John Snow started tracking the occurrence of the disease by going to each home and getting the data on the patients. He was a physician at that time. He used to treat many cholera patients. He had treated many before. He has been treating patients for 20 years. So what he did is, this time he was like, okay, I'll trace the source of this infection. I have to stop this anyhow. I have to trace the source of this infection because it is spreading and killing people. So what he did, wherever he is seeing the cases, he went there. He went there and then he visited each household and started to collect the data on the patients. Data means what data? He had a theory that maybe it is spread through contaminated water. Only one of the few people who had this theory. At that time, people used to believe that cholera and other diseases used to spread through bad air or miasma, like that, or past life sins. It is like that. So at that time, he had some theory, no, it is spreading through some bad or dirty water. So he went to each household, he asked how many people had been affected, how many people had died, and before they had the infection, what had they eaten, what had they drunk, water or anything else. If water, then where did they get that water? Because at that time, not every household had water supply. Okay, they went to get the water from the outside street pump. Like you see in the villages here nowadays, people used to get water from the community water hand pump. So what he saw, that cases were all described in and around the hand pump of the Broad Street of London. So he mapped these cases in Soho outbreak and he saw that almost all the cases are concentrated in the Broad Street and especially around that location of a hand pump. Okay. Then he had asked many patients and he saw that most of the people who were infected were drinking from that hand pump only before they got infected. So he made a hypothesis that cholera was being spread due to contamination of this city's water supply, especially through that hand pump. At the time, prevailing theory was cholera or any disease was due to miasma or bad air and sins of past life. So being a physician for over 20 years, he sought to campaign against this theory and bring to trial the water supply, especially the hand pump on the Broad Street. So he wanted to prove that. Nowadays, if you want to prove something, what you need? Some kind of hard evidence, right? That will tie the source of the infection to the disease. Now, because at that time there was not much technology, he had no definite evidence. But he had this theory because he was taking the history of everyone and seeing that, okay, most of the people are drinking from this hand pump only. Why people used to drink? Because there was that, everyone thought that the Broad Street water pump had very sweet water. So everyone used to take water from there and drink from there. But people who had drunk from there maximum were getting infected. So he had to have some evidence, right? This was just what he found out from the history. There was no hard evidence. What did he find? By this shoe leather tracking or shoe leather epidemiology. Shoe leather means he is linking from one case to another. He is going to one home, finding some cases, taking the history, then linking another house from there. That, okay, from this person, that person got infected. Maybe there's some connection like that. He found that most of those who had died had drunk water from the same pump. And what happened is there was a nearby Poland Street workhouse showed barely a handful number of cases among more than 500 inmates. There was a workhouse like that. People there, they were very nearby, but that segment of area, there were 500 people working there. There were very few cases among them. Clearly, the bad air or sins of past life theory was wrong because people who were working there were very bad people who had done bad deeds, but they were not getting infected. Okay. Why? Because he then took the history there. He also inquired there how many people among you got infected, and he saw that the water consumed here came from the workhouse's own well. So those people did not go and drink from the Broad Street hand pump. Okay, they are drinking from their own well, and people, they were all like inmates, like they were having any other past sins committed. They were not getting infected because they were drinking from their own well. Then there was another brewery nearby. Brewery means where there is beer available for drinking. So he found that the employees at a nearby brewery, around 70 in all, had escaped this disease. So these workers were allowed actually a daily ration of beer. So they are drinking mainly beer every day, almost every day, and they were not drinking from the well. So that was also an area nearby where the people were not getting infected. Okay, among all the people around the Broad Street. So these people, they were also like drinking beer, not doing very good habits, but they were also not getting infected. So whatever this theory that people who are like leading bad lifestyle, lived in very dirty environments, like in a prison or a workspace or a brewery, they were more prone to getting cholera. At that time, it was thought like that. But here in the ground level, when the physician went everywhere to see where the cases had happened, he has seen the complete opposite in some cases. So, what is the evidence then? So, he wanted to test his hypothesis. So, now he had a working hypothesis that, okay, no, maybe the Broad Street pump water from there only is the culprit. So, he wanted to test it. How can you test it? He conducted chemical experiments, microscopy, but could not find anything. So you have to find something in that microscope, right? He thought that there was something in that water which I can find out through microscope. I can find out through the chemical experiments by mixing chemicals and such. Maybe can find some contaminants in there, some chemical in there that is infecting the person, but he didn't find anything. And at that time, the microscopes were also not very much developed. Like even the bacteria were not found by that. Robert Koch came in 1884, like 30 years later. So he was the one who had discovered the bacteria. But 30 years before, no one had even seen the bacteria in the microscope till then. So he wanted to find something, but he could not find at that time. The civil engineering department checked the public well of the water underneath the hand pump, but found no leakage. So there was a well beneath that hand pump where the water was stored. Water was coming from the river. But there also the workers checked and there was no leakage from any nearby scene into the water. So he is finding no evidence, no hard evidence. So he had nothing concrete as proof except for this circumstantial evidence that death was related to drinking water from the pump. Even people from outside this Soho area, people who had come from outside the Soho area, maybe visiting some relatives, if they had drunk from that pump, they had also died after going to their homes. So it is like that. So he has strong circumstantial evidence, but he did not have any definite proof. Okay. So what did he do? He persuaded the authorities about the danger of cholera from that Broad Street water pump and the patterns of illness and death in Soho. He then convinced the authorities to disable the pump by removing its handle. And after that, the epidemic vanished in just 2 to 3 days. So what happened is, he had convinced the authorities, because at that time authorities were also believing it was spread through miasma or bad sins or anything. So he had a very hard time convincing them that remove the handle, otherwise people are getting more infected, more people are dying. And at around that time, the cases were already decreasing a little bit in number. So the authorities thought, okay, let's entertain him, let's humor him, let's remove the hand pump for a few days. After removing the hand pump, the epidemic like rapidly vanished in 2 to 3 days. It's totally stopped. People stopped dying or getting infected. But at that time, the authority still did not believe in this, in his theory. He just entertained his uh, proposal, but they didn't believe him. And after a few, I think 1 month or 2 months, they installed the hand pump again. Okay, so this was the story. So, what was the real reason of the outbreak? Later, after studying this epidemic, some people were also studying this, some people believed in his theory. So, they found that later that this public well had been dug 3 feet from a old cesspit that had begun to leak fecal bacteria. What is a cesspit? At that time, there was no sewer system per se in London. Okay, what happened was outside each home in every street there was a area, dug area like called a cesspit, where people used to throw all their waste there, like vegetable waste, human waste, everything. They used to throw there in that cesspit. Okay, and it was cleared a little sometime later. But if people used to throw in the cesspit. There was no sewage system in London at that time. What happened is there was a cesspit very close to the um, well of that hand pump, around only 3 feet. Okay, nowadays it is recommended that it should be around 100 meters. Any hand pump should be 100 meters away from any contamination. কন্টামিনেশন সোর্স থেকে 100 মিটার দূরে কোনো হ্যান্ডপাম্প থাকতে হবে, এটা ইন্ডিয়ার নাওয়াডেজ কারেন্ট রেকমেন্ডেশন. But at that time, as you can imagine, it is very near to a cesspit. So what happened is, from that cesspit, it was leaking into that water source very microscopically, very slowly. So what happened is, it was not visible to the naked eye, but it was leaking. Wastewater from washing the nappies used by a baby who had contracted the cholera from another source drained in this cesspit. So some baby was actually infected by the cholera in that house. That was the primary case, the first case. And what happened is, from there, from the cesspit, the fecal bacteria, that Vibrio cholerae, had entered into that water source, infected the water source, and then infected the person, contaminated the water source and infected the person, whoever drank from that water pump. So this was the whole story. So as you can imagine, what happened is, this physician John Snow, what he did, he had gathered lots of circumstantial evidence. Basis on that, he took some action, but he had no definite proof, like he didn't find any substance that was causing the infection. Okay, because at that time the germ theory was not there. People didn't even know that they were microscopic world or something. So it was discovered 30 years later. But he had this theory before even the bacteria or germ theory. He had this theory that something was in the water that was causing these cases, and he had found that out by going to each home and mapping the cases and their source, their possible source of infection. So this was one way of finding what was causing the disease, and one way of trying to stop the disease from happening. Okay, so this is one way of controlling the disease. What usually doctors do in the hospital is, patient come to them, they prescribe some medicine, you take the medicine, and that is controlled, right? That is what is happening normally, তাই তো, হ্যাঁ কি না, তাই তো? But here the approach is different. What happens is, going to each home, mapping the cases, mapping the sources, and trying to control at the source only. যেখান থেকে ইনফেকশনটা স্প্রেড হচ্ছে সেখানটা কন্ট্রোল করার চেষ্টা করছে, নট দ্য কেসেস পার সে। প্রত্যেকজনকে বাড়ি বাড়ি গিয়ে ট্রিট করছেন না উনি, ওনাদের হিস্ট্রি নিয়ে হোয়াট হি ইজ ডুইং, হি ইজ ট্রাইং টু ফাইন্ড আউট দ্য সোর্স অফ দ্যাট আউটব্রেক অ্যান্ড ট্রাইং টু কন্ট্রোল দ্যাট। নাও লেটস লুক অ্যাট আ ডিফারেন্ট ডিজিজ। একটা কেস স্টাডি হলো, এবার আরেকটা কেস স্টাডিতে আসি। By the late 19th century, 70 to 90% of the urban populations of Europe and North America were infected by this Mycobacterium tuberculosis. This red bacteria that you can see under the microscopic field, that is the acid fast bacilli or the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacilli, which causes tuberculosis in patients. ठीक है? Okay. About 80% of those individuals who developed active TB died of it, and it caused a quarter of all deaths. So this was a very, very huge disease throughout the world. Before it was seen under the microscope, this disease was called by different names, called consumption, okay, other things. So what happened is, it is nowadays called tuberculosis because the bacteria is named Mycobacterium tuberculosis. But before, 200 years ago, it used to be called by different names. But whatever it is, people knew that this disease is the main cause of death among most of the population, especially in Europe and North America at that time. So they were infected by this, and if they were actively developing the disease, then they will die. They will mostly die. 80% of them were dying, and it caused a quarter of all the deaths. Means among all the deaths that is happening, 25% of it were caused by this consumption disease or Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So a little bit of history. This consumption disease or tuberculosis nowadays, which is known, it has been described from antiquity and Middle Ages, Africa, India, China, Europe, everywhere this disease is known. So several physicians through 17th and 18th centuries, they described the pulmonary and the extrapulmonary manifestations of TB. But what was causing it? No one knew. Okay, at that time. So they knew that what symptoms they cause. In the lungs, what they cause cough. Okay, they cause blood hemoptysis. Okay, pulmonary. Then there was fever, night sweats, weakness, weight loss. Okay, these were the general manifestations. And there were some extra pulmonary manifestations if it happened somewhere else, like pleuritis around the lung. If the fluid is there, that is called pleuritis. Okay, then there was common sites which got affected was the brain, meninges, lymph nodes, bone and joints, genitourinary tract. Okay, productive cup, etc., structural abnormalities. So all these things used to happen, and they were described. The symptoms and signs were described from before. So this disease became an epidemic by the 19th century. Epidemic means outbreak, means cases that are occurring which is exceeding the number of expected number of cases. The number of cases that are expected of a disease, that is in a population, if some disease is exceeding that number by many fold, so many number of cases are occurring, that is called an epidemic. So this epidemic was happening all around the world, and people were knowing the signs and the symptoms, but they didn't know how to stop it. Especially it was found that it ravaged through the poor. Means in the industrial age it was very much prominent in the 18th, 19th century. At that time it became very widespread. And where it was seen most, it was seen mainly among the poor people. So this disease became common among the urban poor, because people from the villages were coming to the area, to the city to work in the industries. They were remaining in the urban slums where there was very much overcrowding. They did not have any money, and among them only the disease was much widespread, much more seen. So the poor and the ramshackle tenement houses were blamed. In 1815, 1 in 4 deaths of England were due to this consumption. So what you can see, that the people had somehow figured out that there was something that was causing the consumption disease. They were causing mainly among the poor living conditions, insufficient nutrition, people who did not have much nutrition, did not eat much. Okay, then low immunity, people who had low immunity, and they were remaining in crowded spaces, inefficient ventilation in the house, poor sanitary environment, etc. So they had figured out this host and environmental factors. Maybe they knew the agent by that time, maybe they didn't know. Okay, because 1815, again around that time, bacteria wasn't discovered. But people were knowing that people who were having these conditions, the host and the environment conditions, were getting affected by this disease. So they knew the factors that are kind of the cause of the disease, not the main cause. So everything worked together to cause this disease. It is not like only if there is tuberculosis bacteria, you will have tuberculosis, because tuberculosis bacteria is in every one of us. Almost 90% of the Indians have TB bacilli in their lung. But not everyone is having TB, right? Why? Because of these other factors. Because these other factors are controlled. People are not living in that very unsanitary, unhygienic environment anymore. Okay? Crowded spaces, then poor living conditions, very people were not getting to eat at that time, many people died of hunger. So nowadays it is not like that. Nowadays there is maximum food security. Okay, people have better living conditions, they have better sanitary purposes, so everything is upgraded. Because of that only TB is not occurring in every one of us. Okay, so all these factors together cause TB, not just one. So, time-learner disease control. In 1869, Jean-Antoine Villemin demonstrated from the human cadavers that the disease was indeed contagious. He had tested, before the bacteria was discovered, he had tested that, okay, this disease, if I take from a dead person and introduce into a mice, the mice is also getting this tuberculosis. So, it is contagious disease. Then in 1882, Robert Koch revealed the disease was caused by an infectious agent, tubercle bacilli, he discovered under the microscope. TB was then made a notifiable disease, means when whoever has TB, you have to inform to the authorities that these many cases of TB has occurred in the area. There were campaigns to stop the spitting in public places. The infected poor were pressured to enter the sanatoria that resemble prisons, means they have to go and stay somewhere separate from the general public so that the disease is not spread among the public. Then the British epidemiologist Thomas McEwen showed that the treatment by streptomycin, after that the antibiotics were discovered, then the streptomycin antibiotic, here he was showing that they reduce the number of the deaths from this tuberculosis by 51%. Okay, by 51%. Since it was introduced. So this was much later. But before only, what is happening is, this disease was contagious, it was spreading among the poor, unsanitary condition, people were knowing all these factors. After this bacilli was discovered, it was made a notifiable disease and things started improving a little. And after streptomycin came, the number of deaths then reduced. The number of deaths among the TB patients reduced by half. So things were improving a little bit. Unfortunately, ultimately what happened is, if you see the timeline of this discovery of each factor of the TB and you see the number of deaths that were occurring from the TB, they had already started reducing much before that. From the 1860 itself, before the discovery of the TB bacilli, the cases started reducing actually. He also showed that the mortality from TB had already declined by 90 to 95% before streptomycin and BCG vaccination were actually available. So, things were starting to, like deaths were starting to decline. TB bacilli discovered, they were discovered, then skin testing, then World Wars, then finally TB antibiotics around 1948 they were introduced. But before that only the TB deaths were decreased by a lot. Why? Because from the original concept that people had, that very poor people who were living in very bad conditions were having TB. So I have to come out of this condition. So what happened is, authorities started to improve the living conditions among the people. And that is the first step that had actually decreased the TB deaths. Okay. So McEwen explained the decline in the mortality from the infectious disease by an improved standard of living, particularly by better nutrition, better hygiene, and was much less than the medical intervention. So it was not by the treatment of the doctor per se, but improved living conditions, improved nutrition, better hygiene. If that was introduced by those known factors around the 1850s, 60s, that actually had started to decrease the number of deaths of TB. So again, you are controlling a disease by tackling some major health issues or problems that are health allied factors, not exactly health factors, but some factors that are allied or related to health. So what is there is, you are again started to control a disease. Okay, your main aim is to control the disease, right? You want to stop the disease, control the disease. So by improving the living conditions, you have controlled the disease. This was one intervention that you can do, and not treating the disease per se again. Okay. So what did we learn from these two case studies of epidemiology? In the cholera case, John Snow had made a distribution map of the Broad Street Soho, and he had done this spot map. Spot map means that bars I was showing in each household how many number of cases, that is called a spot map. He dotted the number of dots that was occurring in each household, and he created a spot map, that is called a spot map. Okay, he created a spot map. He then made a hypothesis. He had this shoe leather tracking method of epidemiology, going house to house and tracking the number of cases and testing a hypothesis with possible factors. Okay. In the tuberculosis case, what was there? Description of the disease manifestation. The people had described, many physicians have described what were the signs and symptoms of the disease. Distribution, they had figured out that there was distribution, more TB cases among the urban poor population. And there was again proven that transmission of this infectious agent was taking place because it is contagious. So that is resulting in more number of cases and more number of deaths. And they had figured out that there was not just one agent, there was the agent, host factors and environment factors. This is very important, the determinants, agent, host and environment. Okay. So in each disease, there is there. Then finally for both the cases, there is the description of an epidemic or the outbreak and taking a definitive action at the end. In the cholera, it is like you improve the water quality, remove the hand pump, do not let people drink from it. And in the TB case, improving the living standards, taking a definitive action. Okay, in each case, you can see that there is no hard evidence. At that time, there was no hard evidence that such an agent is causing the disease. But still you took action based on what? Some theory, some hypothesis, some circumstantial evidence. Now getting that circumstantial evidence by all these factors or all these things and then taking a definitive action. This whole process, what has happened both in cholera and TB, is called epidemiology. So you can understand it is a bit different from treating a disease directly, what a doctor does in the tertiary care. In public health, what happens is this happens. You tackle the disease from the source, not at the termination point. When the patient is coming to you with a disease, you do not treat the patient there. You treat the cases at the source, where the case is occurring from, and what are the factors that are leading to it. If you trace those risk factors and you control those risk factors, then you will be able to stop the disease or control the disease at the source and prevent more cases from happening. The prevention aspect is very important. That is epidemiology. So all these factors that are there, that is description of the disease manifestation, distribution of the disease among the population. You can distribute, tackle, see which population is getting more affected. You can create a spot map. Then you make a hypothesis from there. Okay, you find out the determinants of that disease and track the cases, make a hypothesis, describe this outbreak, and finally take a definitive action. All these things are leading to epidemiology. Understood what is epidemiology? All these factors. Okay, tracking the disease, the distribution, the determinants, the spread, you describe the disease and then take the action. Or not only describing the disease, you have to take the action also to prevent that disease or control that disease. This whole process is called epidemiology. So you put all this together, you get epidemiology. The study of the occurrence and distribution of health-related events, states and processes in specified populations. You define the population also where it is occurring, including the study of the determinants, that is agents, host and environment. influencing such processes, and the application of this knowledge to control these relevant health situations. So this is a definition that is given in your Park textbook. Okay, it is a very elaborate definition, but I wanted you to understand each of the keywords. That is why we did these two case studies. So what does each of these keyword mean? Because when someone will ask you what is epidemiology, they do not want to know this line by line or punctuation, full stop, comma of the definition. People do not want to know that. They want to know whether you have got the keywords right. What is the keywords? Occurrence, distribution, disease, health related states, events, specified populations, determinants of the disease, and then application of the knowledge to control these relevant health problems. So in this manner, if you say that this is epidemiology, then you are correct only. Okay. So epidemiology is different from traditional disease treatment. Disease treatment is done at the terminal end of the disease, natural history of the disease. That is, if a disease starts occurring in a person from the infection till signs and symptoms termination in either cure or chronic disease or death. So in the later phase, the disease treatment occurs. But in the early phase, if you try to control the disease by studying where the disease is occurring from, that is called epidemiology. That is how is different from the disease treatment. You tackle the disease at the source, not at the terminal end. So this is the definition of epidemiology. Kichuta bujhte perecho? Have you understood a little bit about it? Okay. So because epidemiology will be taught in this year, in the next year, if you apply this process of epidemiology to each disease you will study throughout this whole MBBS course, all those diseases are mentioned in that Park textbook, and if you apply this epidemiological knowledge to each disease, and that is how the questions will be asked only, based on this epidemiological perspective of the disease, not the disease treatment. I will not ask you, or community medicine people will not ask you, what is the treatment of TB? Tell me the whole treatment procedure. If a person is admitted, then what you will do? Such and such. What are the complications? They will not ask you that. They will ask you what is the prevention, what are the factors, what is the treatment, what is the population level control of the disease. How will you control the disease in a population? Because when you go out after MBBS to the public sector, when you are working in a public hospital, like district hospital, PSC, CHC, when you are working there, you will be presented with such cases only. There you will get a number of cases, and then the BMOH of the hospital or the district administrator, they will give you instructions. You do this screening, you do this test, you do this treatment, you do this house to house, send the ASHAs out. So all these things are epidemiology, under epidemiology, to control the disease from the source itself. This is epidemiology. Now the study part of the epidemiology, there are two parts of the epidemiology definition. The studying of the disease, distribution, determinants, occurrence, and then application of the disease, of this knowledge to take action. There are two parts, studying and then application. So how to study? A brief overview I will give today. Okay, not the details. A brief overview I will give today. That is, the study is done by knowing what study I will do in the population to get that risk factor, to know the risk factors of the disease. So that is the study design. So that is called a study design. What study I will do, what kind of study I will do, that is called study design. So research design, including study design. How will you do the study? Study design. Study design means, if you want to do a study, for example, there is a outbreak of measles. Patients are coming to the OPD. You want to know among whom it has happened, how it has happened, what is the source. Okay, so you then come up with a study design. We will see what study designs are there. Then you have to define the study population. Means among whom you are doing this, study, among whom you are researching. You have to define the population. That is among the college students, among the population of the villages, among the population of a district, among the population of a country, you have to define it. So the target population, source population, sampling from, etc. Then methods, how will you collect the data? The methods of data collection. Sampling design, how will you take the sample from the population? Tools of data collection, by what tools you will collect the data? And finally, analysis. If you are wanting to link a disease to a source or a risk factor, what analysis you have to do to find that? So, in a study, what happens is, before going into the study design, in a study what happens is, you have to first define the objectives. For example, again, if there are fever with rash cases coming, your study objective will be to find out the proportion of people in the population who are suffering from this disease, number one. Number two, to find out how many of these fever with rash cases are actually having measles. Okay, so this I want to actually find, and then finally to control the disease. So these whatever I achieve to do in through my study, that is called the study objective. I have to define that first, that I will do these things. Then after that I will decide the study design, that what kind of study I have to do. After that I will have to see how many people I will take from my population. If there are like millions of people affected, I cannot take millions of people. I don't have the time to take millions of people in my study, take data from millions of people and then analyze. Okay, because that is a very time consuming, money consuming process. We don't have that time. So I will take only a subset of them, maybe 100 people or 200 people from them. And I will collect the data and then see what the diseases occurred. So that is called the sampling, taking a sample from the population. How to do that? That there are also some techniques to do that properly, so that this small sample is representing the whole millions of people in the population. I have to take a very good representative sample from them. Okay, so taking a random sample in anything from that whole population will not always give me the accurate results, or that is available, or that is generalizable, or that is you would say applicable to the whole population. So I have to take a sample that is representative of the population properly, so that whatever findings I will find in that sample, I can then apply them to the whole population. So I'll take the sample, I'll do the study, take the data from them, analyze the data, okay, and then finally whatever results I'll find, I'll then convert that to the action. That is, I'll take that and apply the knowledge to take action to control the health problem. Okay, so this is the whole process of a study, of a research study. Now that first, at that second step, after the objectives, I am doing the study design. So what is this study design? It is a specific plan or protocol to conduct the study, which allows the investigator to translate the conceptual hypothesis into operational hypothesis. Means what is happening is, once I have the objectives in place, for example, the first objective, I want to find out the number of people who are having this fever with rashes. And then I have to find out how many people among them are having the measles among those people. Okay, so if that is the objective, then I want to know how many people are right now having fever with rashes first. So for that, what I have to do, I have to go to each household, for example, only one time, and then jot down how many people among your family are having this fever with rashes. Okay, so this is one type of study design. Okay, cross-sectional. That is, you go to the population at one point of time, you take a cross-section of it or a snapshot of the population, you take all their factors, all the disease factors, all their exposure factors at that point of time, and then collect the data. That is one type of study design. If you take people, one village versus another village, and then see through 10 years, how many people are among them are having diabetes in 10 years, that is another type of study design, because you are following them through time, you are taking the data at multiple steps of each person. That is another type of study design. So these are called different study designs. So the procedures and methods predetermined by an investigator which be adhered into conducting a research project. So whatever study design you are deciding at the beginning, you have to stick by it. Okay, that is why planning the whole study in advance is very important. Before actually doing the study, you have to plan it first. Otherwise, your study results will be very inaccurate. The disease will not be controlled. It will go out of hand. Okay. So we study design to choose. Again, number one, it depends on the objectives. And number two, it depends on what resources you have. You can conduct, if you want to conduct a study for 10 years, you will need all this money, manpower, materials and time, right? But if you do not have the money, you do not have the manpower to conduct the study for 10 years, how will you conduct the study? That is not possible. So whatever is feasible to you, you have to do. So it depends on the objectives of your study and depends on the resources of your study. So there are two broad types of study design, observational and experimental. Observational means whatever is there happening in the population, you are observing and collecting the data only. That is called observational study in the simplest terms. What is experimental study? Experimental or interventional study is investigator is giving the exposure themselves. Means that is happening in case of, for example, a drug trial or a clinical trial or a vaccine trial. Okay, whatever drugs, new drugs are being tested and then given in the market. Before that, they are being tested for years to see whether they are effective or not. So, who is giving the, some people, some sample are taken, one of them is giving one drug, one of them is given another drug and then tested whether that drug is effective or not for a certain disease. So, that drug is given by the investigator themselves. So, that is called a interventional or experimental study, where the exposure or the factor is given by the investigator themselves. That is called experimental study. But if the investigator is just observing and then recording the data, that is called an observational study. So there are broadly two types of study. If someone asks what are the types of study design, you tell them there are broadly two types, observational and experimental. Then how the research is classified. Did researcher assign the exposure? Means is the researcher giving that risk factor or the exposure? If yes, then it is an experimental study. If then you go to the random allocation, means now the samples you have taken, how many people are, if are the intervention or the exposure given randomly, means do the investigator themselves decide whether who will get that new drug and who will get the placebo or the old drug, or is the allocation of that drug random or generated by a random table, so that neither the investigator will know nor the patient or the people in the trial will know which drug they are going to get. So is the allocation random or not? Yes, then it is a randomized control trial. No, it is a non-randomized control trial. So I am just telling you the different types of study designs that are there. If the allocation is random, it is a randomized control trial. If it is non-random, it is a non-randomized control trial. Now, if the researcher did not assign the exposure, it is called a observational study, as I said. Is there a comparison group? Means naturally, if there is a comparison group, means some people are getting that risk factor or the exposure, for example, smoking, and some people are not having that exposure, for example, it's non-smoker group. So if, for example, if there is a smoker group and a non-smoker group, so if there is a comparison group like that, then it is an analytical study. So under observational, if there is a comparison group, that is a analytical study. And if the analytical study, you have to see the direction, means the direction of time, through which direction of time you are following. If you are following from the exposure to the outcome, means you are following smokers and non-smokers for 10 years and seeing whether how many people are developing lung cancer among each group. Among the smokers, how many are developing lung cancer? Among the non-smokers, how many are developing lung cancer? If you are studying from that exposure, that is smoking, to the outcome, that is lung cancer, then it is called a cohort study. A cohort study. if you are studying from the outcome to the exposure, means you have already got two groups, two comparison groups. One of them are lung cancer patients, another are non-lung cancer patients. And you then ask them whether you did smoking or not. So how many people among the among the lung cancer group had smoked before, and how many among the non-lung cancer groups had smoked before. If you do that tracing from the outcome to the exposure, then it is called a case control study. And if you are studying the level of the outcome and the exposure at the same time, that is a snapshot. That is how many of you are having lung cancer now and how many of you are doing smoking now. So that is called a cross-sectional study. What is the difference is, now whoever people are smoking now, okay, they might not have been smoking before, and whoever people are having lung cancer now, they might not have lung cancer before. So I cannot directly link smoking and lung cancer in that type of study, because I don't know whether people having lung cancer at that point of time are had smoking or not before, did smoking or not before. So I am not taking that data, I am taking the data now. How many of you are smoking now? And how many of you are having lung cancer now? I will not know in the future if they are taking the smoking habit, taking up the smoking habit, and then having the risk of the disease. So I'm not knowing that also. I'm not following them forward in time. I am taking it now. How many of you are smoking now? How many of you are having lung cancer now? So that is called a cross-sectional study. You are taking a snapshot or a cross-section and staying the level of the outcome and the level of the exposure at this point of time. So whatever result you are having in this type of study, that is cross-sectional study, that is a correlation or an association. You can associate that, okay, this population is having high level of smoking, that is why they are and that they are also having a high level of lung cancer. So there is some association between the two things. But I cannot tell that this smoking has caused the lung cancer. So there is a difference between the term association and the term causation. Cause association does not mean causation. In epidemiology, you learn this. Association, that is, if two factors are associated with each other, if there is some relation, it does not mean that a relation is causative. Not always. So for causation, you need time. You have to give some time, either forwards in time or backwards in time. Past history or the follow-up of that exposure. You have to give the time factor. Then only you will be able to establish the causal factor. If not, if you are doing only a cross-sectional study, it is only association. Okay? And if there is not a comparison group, there is no comparison group, then it is a descriptive cross-sectional study. Okay? There is a descriptive, usually it's called a descriptive study, but there can be also among the descriptive study, there is a descriptive cross-sectional study where you are just studying the level of the exposure in the outcome and you are not finding any association. Okay. So these are the types of studies that are there. So we will then see cross-sectional design, participants recruited based on the eligibility criteria, study the outcome and the exposure at the same time, and estimate the prevalence. That is how many people are having that fever with rash. I want to find out that prevalence. So I am doing this cross-sectional study. If I just want to find out the prevalence, the number of people who are having such disease, I can do the cross-sectional study. Only that if I want to know. Okay, because I am studying the outcome, I am also studying the exposure at the same time. I am studying the outcome, so I can tell, okay, 60% of the patients are having measles with rash, fever with rash. So for that I do the cross-sectional study. Now as you can see in this diagram, again the cross-sectional study is whatever is happening in the present, at the present what is the exposure and the outcome. In a cohort study, I am going from the exposure to the outcome, means exposure presently, and I am following it in the future and seeing what is the outcome in those exposure groups. Again in the red you can see the case control study, means I know the outcome, I will see if before in the past they had the risk factors or not. So from the outcome to the exposure if I go, that is a case control study. And again the experimental study, what is happening, that is a randomized control trial or non-randomized control trial. Experimental study, what is happening is you are assigning the exposure and then you are seeing through time that whether they are developing certain outcome or not, or certain diseases are prevented or controlled or not. So that is again you are doing a prospective, that is forwards in time. So in randomized control trial also you are going from the present to the future. So this is this studies in the time perspective. So again I have already told you in the cohort what is happening, that is you are defining the population, you are having this exposed group and the non-exposed group, that is smokers and non-smokers, and then you follow them through time and see how many people among the smokers are having lung cancer and not having lung cancer, and in the non-exposed how many people are having the lung cancer and how many people are not having the lung cancer. So if you are going from the exposure to the outcome, that is the cohort study. Exposure to the outcome, that is the cohort study. So how to just quantify means, as you can see there is time factor here, so I can establish the causal factor here, right? So if I want to establish the causal factor here, how will I establish that? If I can do a definitive measure, that is I can calculate the I can do the analysis and find out. So what is the analysis I do? I do the incidence, that is how many people are developing the disease in the exposure versus the non-exposed group, and if I calculate the relative risk, means what is happening is it is very possible if the disease, if the exposure is actually causing the disease, if there is a causality factor, then this diseased population, this diseased number of people will be definitely more than the diseased here, right? Because people who are having this exposure or the risk factor will have more disease, okay, than the people who are not having the exposure. So this number of diseased people will be more than this number of diseased people, okay, if there is causal factor, if there is causality link. So obviously this divided by this should be more than 1, okay, this divided by this should be more than 1. So if it is more than 1, there is a causality link. If it is equal to 1, then there is no link. If it is less than 1, then there it is protective, means that factor is actually protecting the person from having the disease. So that is called relative risk, okay. This divided by this is called the relative risk. Very simple terms. So by calculating or by analyzing, I am finding out whether there is risk factor or not, whether there is causal link or not. So this is one thing I can do in the cohort study. The incidence, that is the number of cases which are happening, and the relative risk, if you are dividing these two, okay. Then case control, we will just overview today, not going into details, okay. So case control, again you are going from the cases and the controls, that is people with the disease and without the disease, and you take the history whether they are having the exposure or the non-exposure, that is whether they had a history of that risk factor or not. So if you are doing for the each of the case and the controls, so that is the case control study, okay. In case control study you cannot analyze the risk, because for risk you have to follow up from the exposure to the outcome. In this case you calculate the odds ratio. Just remember the term odds ratio. What is the odds of having the exposure in the cases compared to the exposure in the controls? That is the odds ratio that you calculate in the case control study. And in a experimental study, what is happening is intervention, the researcher is giving some intervention of the exposure. So for example, administration of a drug or a vaccine or a diet supplement, performance of a diagnostic test, introduction of an educational tool, etc., health education tool. So all these things you can do through this experimental or interventional study. So as you know, I have already shown you, it is randomized control trial. If you are allocating the exposure at random to each person. You do not know which person will get which exposure. And if you do not do that, if you assign yourself, then there is a problem because you can favor one person over the other. So that is the non-randomized control trial. So all these designs are there. I am not going into details. Just telling the last part is, random assignment implies that each participant has an equal chance of being allocated to the two groups. Mean if there are two groups, group A will get the new drug and group B will get the standard treatment or the old drug, then this person who will come into the sample, which group will they get allocated to, that will be a random assignment. So each person will get an equal chance of getting selected in either of the groups. So if there is equal chance of getting selected in either of the groups, then that is called the random assignment or the randomization, which is the heart of the RCT or the randomized control trial. Randomization is the heart of the RCT study. Okay? And the outcomes are then compared. After you then allocate the groups, you follow them through time and then you compare the outcomes between the intervention and the comparator group. This is the RCT or the interventional study. Okay? So just remember, observational studies propose, RCTs dispose. Remember the John Snow study, he had a hypothesis. He had proposed that the contaminated water can cause the cholera or is causing the cholera. He had hypothesized. So observational, because he is doing this observational study, he is seeing what is observing and then analyzing. So he had still that observational studies propose or they make a hypothesis. But RCTs will be done to prove that hypothesis, that okay, such exposure is causing or is protecting from certain disease. So this is the difference between observational studies and the RCT or the experimental study. Okay, so today we have learned what is epidemiology and what are the broad types of study design.